Now let's begin. Blake McDermott stood in the hospital corridor, fluorescent lights humming overhead, watching his 3-year-old daughter through the observation window. Paige's small body was wrapped in bandages, machines beeping softly around her bed. The accident had happened so fast, a distracted driver running a red light while Blake was taking her to the park. His truck had taken most of the impact, but Paige had still suffered severe head trauma. "Mr. McDermott," the neurologist said, approaching with a tablet in hand. Dr. Kerry Shields had kind eyes, but his expression was grave. "I need to be honest with you. The swelling is significant. We're doing everything we can, but the next 72 hours are critical." Blake nodded, unable to speak. His wife Melinda sat in the waiting room, surrounded by her family. Her mother, Barbara Calhoun, had arrived within an hour of the accident, followed by her father Martin and her brother Christopher. The Calhouns were old money, third-generation pharmaceutical wealth, the kind of family that appeared in society pages and sat on museum boards. Blake had never fit into their world. He was a civil engineer, successful in his own right, but the Calhouns had made it clear from the beginning that their daughter had married beneath her station. They'd tolerated the marriage because Melinda had been pregnant, and the Calhouns valued appearances above all else. "Blake," Melinda called from the waiting room. She looked pale, her hands twisted in her lap. "Mother wants to speak with you." Barbara Calhoun stood as Blake approached. She was 62, impeccably dressed even at midnight, her silver hair styled perfectly. Martin stood beside her, his face stern as always. "We need to discuss Paige's care," Barbara said without preamble. "Martin and I have consulted with specialists. The prognosis is not good. The doctor said the next few days are critical," Blake replied. "She's strong. She'll pull through." Barbara's expression hardened. "Blake, you need to face reality. The brain damage is extensive. Even if she survives, she'll never be normal. We have to think about quality of life." "She's 3 years old," Blake said, his voice rising. "She deserves every chance." "Every chance at what?" Martin interjected. "A life of suffering? Of being a burden? The Calhoun name has stood for excellence for 3 generations. This family cannot." "Cannot what?" Blake stepped closer, anger flaring. "She's your granddaughter. She's a child who will never have a normal life," Barbara said coldly. "There are facilities that specialize in cases like this. Quality care, round-the-clock nursing. We can ensure she's comfortable." Blake stared at her, understanding dawning. "You want to hide her away." "We want what's best for everyone," Martin said. "Including you. You're young. You and Melinda can try again. This tragedy doesn't have to define your entire lives." "Get out," Blake said quietly. "Excuse me. I said get out. This is my daughter we're talking about, not a business problem to solve." The argument had been the first of many. Over the following weeks, as Paige stabilized but remained in a coma-like state, the pressure intensified. Blake refused every suggestion about facilities and letting nature take its course. He hired additional specialists, researched experimental treatments, maxed out his credit cards on consultations. Then one night, 6 weeks after the accident, everything changed. Blake had fallen asleep in the chair beside Paige's bed, exhausted from another 18-hour day split between work and the hospital. He woke to find Melinda standing over him, her eyes red from crying. "Blake, she's gone," Melinda whispered. He jerked awake, looking at the bed. It was empty. Panic seized him. "Where is she? What happened?" "Mother arranged for a transfer. There's a specialized facility upstate, Meadowbrook Care Center. They can handle her needs better than this hospital." The doctors agreed it was best. Blake was already on his feet, grabbing his jacket. "You moved her without telling me? I'm her father." "You weren't being rational," Melinda said, her voice breaking. "Blake, please. She needs constant care. This facility has everything." "Where is it? Give me the address." Melinda's face crumpled. "Mother has legal custody. The doctors declared you mentally unfit to make medical decisions. You were obsessing, spending money we don't have, refusing to accept reality. They had to intervene." The next morning, Blake discovered the depth of the betrayal. The Calhouns had used their connections, a judge who owed Martin favors, doctors on their payroll, lawyers who specialized in making problems disappear. Blake's parental rights had been suspended on grounds of emotional instability and financial irresponsibility. The court record showed he'd missed work repeatedly, accrued massive debt, and had been observed having manic episodes at the hospital. None of it was false, exactly. But the context had been stripped away, reframed to paint him as unstable rather than desperate. He hired a lawyer, burning through his remaining savings. The attorney, a sharp woman named Rosie McIntyre, laid out the grim reality. They have a judge in their pocket, medical experts on their side, and documentation that makes you look like you're having a breakdown, Rosie explained. And technically, you still have rights. You can visit Paige at the facility, participate in care decisions. They're just preventing you from making unilateral choices. I want to see her. I'll arrange it. Blake drove 3 hours to Meadowbrook Care Center. It was exactly what he'd feared, a pristine facility with manicured grounds, designed to warehouse people wealthy families wanted to forget. He was escorted to Paige's room by a nurse who wouldn't meet his eyes. Paige lay in a hospital bed, connected to feeding tubes and monitors. She was so small, so still. Blake sat beside her for hours, talking to her, reading her favorite books, refusing to believe she couldn't hear him. Barbara appeared in the doorway as evening fell. Visiting hours are ending. I'm not leaving. Blake, this anger isn't helping anyone. We're ensuring Paige has the best care possible. You need to focus on rebuilding your life. Melinda needs you. Melinda chose you over our daughter. Melinda chose reality over delusion. Barbara's voice softened, a calculated sympathy entering her tone. I know you're hurting, but Paige is safe here. You can visit. In time, you'll see this was the right decision. Over the following weeks, Blake visited whenever he could, but each time became more difficult. Security began questioning him. Delays occurred in getting permission to enter. Visiting hours mysteriously shortened. Melinda filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and mental strain. Then, 3 months after Paige's transfer, Blake received a call at work. Mr. McDermott? It was Dr. Christopher Lim, the facilities director. I need you to come to Meadowbrook immediately. It's about Paige. Blake made the drive in 2.5 hours, his heart hammering. He was met at the entrance by Dr. Lim and Barbara Calhoun. I'm so sorry, Dr. Lim said. Paige passed away this morning. Her brain function had been deteriorating. It was peaceful. Blake's legs nearly gave out. No, I need to see her. That's not advisable, Barbara said gently, her hand on his arm. Remember her as she was. I need to see my daughter. She's already been prepared for transport, Dr. Lim said. Mr. McDermott, I understand this is devastating. But she's at peace now. No more suffering. The funeral was small. Blake stood over the closed casket, knowing something was wrong but unable to articulate what. The weight was wrong. The sound when the pallbearers lifted it was wrong. But he was drowning in grief and lawyers and a divorce that was stripping away everything he had left. He never saw Paige's body, never got closure. And as the years passed, that wrongness never left him. 15 years later, Blake sat in his apartment above the auto repair shop he'd bought 5 years earlier. It wasn't much, 3 rooms, a leaky bathroom, the smell of motor oil permanently embedded in the walls. But it was his, paid for with money he'd saved working construction, then managing repairs, then finally owning the business outright. He didn't think about Paige every day anymore. The grief had become a constant background radiation, always there, but dulled enough that he could function. He'd never remarried, never had other children. He'd built a simple life. Work, the occasional beer with his mechanic Wade Ruiz, and the woodworking projects that filled his evenings. His phone rang at 8:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Unknown number. Mr. McDermott? Blake McDermott. The voice was female, nervous, older. Speaking. My name is Diana Joyce. I'm a nurse at Meadowbrook Care Center. This is difficult. I found something in the old filing systems. Records from 15 years ago. Your daughter, Paige McDermott. Sir, I don't know how to say this. She's alive. Room 47. Blake's phone slipped from his hand, clattering on the table. He picked it up with shaking fingers. What did you say? Your daughter is alive. She's been here the entire time. I found the records by accident. They've been archived incorrectly, hidden in a defunct database. But she's here, and she's alive. I'm so sorry. I don't know why you were told she died. Blake was already grabbing his keys, his wallet. I'll be there. Don't let anyone move her. Don't tell anyone you called me. Sir, I work the night shift. I'll be here. But please hurry. The 600-mile drive took 9 hours. Blake stopped only for gas, his mind racing through every moment of the past 15 years. The closed casket. Barbara's insistence he not see the body. The weight of the coffin. They'd buried an empty box. They'd let him grieve for a child who was alive. He arrived at Meadowbrook at dawn. Diana Joyce met him at a side entrance, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a worn face that spoke of too many years witnessing things she couldn't change. "Mr. McDermott," she said, checking the empty hallway. "I need you to understand something before you see her. I don't know what you were told, what you expect, but Paige, she's not been receiving the care she needed. I only discovered her 2 days ago when I was doing inventory in the long-term ward. Take me to her." Diana led him through hallways that smelled of antiseptic and resignation. The long-term care wing was quiet, most rooms dark. She stopped at room 47, her hand on the door handle. "I've been caring for her since I found her. She's malnourished, has bed sores, muscle atrophy. But Mr. McDermott, she's responsive. She tracks movement with her eyes. She squeezes hands when asked. Whatever they told you about her condition, it was a lie." Blake pushed past her and opened the door. Paige sat in a wheelchair by the window, facing the dawn light. She was 18 now, though she looked younger, her body wasted from years of neglect. Her dark hair hung limp around her face. But her eyes were alive. She turned her head as Blake entered, and something flickered in her expression. Recognition? Hope. Blake crossed the room, falling to his knees beside the wheelchair. "Paige? Baby girl, it's Dad." Her right hand moved slowly, trembling with effort, until it touched his face. A sound came from her throat, not words, but something deliberate, something that meant she knew him. Blake pressed his forehead against her hand and wept. Over the next hour, Diana explained what she'd pieced together. The death had been fabricated, a falsified death certificate, funeral arrangements that were all theater. Paige had been moved to the long-term care wing, her records buried in an old filing system that predated the facility's digital transition 5 years earlier. "The payments came from a trust," Diana said, showing Blake the financial records she'd photocopied. "The Calhoun Family Medical Trust. $15,000 a month for minimal care in the isolation ward. No therapy, no stimulation, just enough to keep her alive." "Why?" Blake's voice was hoarse. "Why not just if they wanted her gone?" "Because that would be murder," Diana said quietly. "This way, she just disappears. No one asks questions. The money keeps flowing, the facility keeps quiet, and the Calhouns maintain their perfect image." Blake looked at the records. Barbara Calhoun's signature on every quarterly review. Martin Calhoun listed as medical proxy. And Melinda, his ex-wife Melinda, listed as secondary contact. "They all knew," Blake said. "This whole time, they all knew." "I called you because what they did is wrong," Diana said. "But Mr. McDermott, if you go to the authorities, you need to be prepared. The Calhouns have money, lawyers, connections. They'll claim the records are falsified, that I'm lying, that you're unstable. The death certificate is official. The grave is real. They've had 15 years to make their version of events unassailable." Blake stood, his mind clearing with cold clarity. "I need you to do something for me. Can you arrange to have Paige transferred to a real medical facility? Somewhere they can assess her, give her proper treatment? I know people at County General. They have an excellent rehabilitation program. But the legal custody. I'll handle the legal custody. But I need time. Can you keep her safe here for a few more days? Keep this quiet." Diana studied him. "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to make sure my daughter gets justice. And I'm planning to make sure the people who did this to her pay for every single day she spent in this room." He spent the next hour with Paige, talking to her, showing her pictures on his phone of the life she should have had. She couldn't speak. Years of neglect had left her muscles weak, her verbal abilities uncertain. But she responded to his voice, her eyes following him, her hand reaching for him when he moved away. "I'm going to fix this," Blake promised her. "I'm going to bring you home, and I'm going to make them pay. Do you understand?" Paige's fingers squeezed his hand. Once deliberate. "Yes." Blake's first call was to Rosie McIntyre, the lawyer who'd tried to help him 15 years ago. She'd retired from active practice, but agreed to meet him at a diner near her home in Philadelphia. "Blake McDermott," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. She was 70 now, her red hair gone silver, but her eyes were still sharp. "I wondered if I'd ever hear from you again. When you stopped returning my calls after the funeral, I figured you'd moved on." "They told me she was dead," Blake said. "Closed casket funeral. Death certificate. Burial." All of it was fake. She's alive, Rosie. She's been in that facility for 15 years. Rosie's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. That's not possible. Blake laid out the evidence, Diana's records, the photographs he'd taken, the financial documents showing the trust payments. Rosie read through everything twice, her expression growing darker. This is criminal, she said finally. Fraud, forgery, false imprisonment, child endangerment. Blake, we can bury them. Can we? Blake leaned forward. You told me 15 years ago they had judges, doctors, lawyers on their payroll. Has that changed? Rosie was quiet for a moment. No. If anything, the Calhouns have more influence now. Martin sits on the hospital board. Barbara is on the State Medical Ethics Commission. Christopher married into the Weston family, the Attorney General's niece. So if I go to the police, what happens? They'll investigate. Slowly. The Calhouns will lawyer up immediately, claim the records are falsified, that Diana is lying or mistaken. They'll produce the death certificate, the burial records, the court documents showing you were declared unfit. They'll paint you as a grieving father who's delusional, who's being manipulated by a disgruntled employee. And Paige becomes a pawn in a legal battle that could take years. Meanwhile, the Calhouns maintain custody, move her to another facility where we can't find her, and by the time it's sorted out, if it ever is, she'll be 25 and even more damaged than she already is. Blake nodded slowly. He'd expected this answer. Then we do it differently. I need you to file a custody petition. Use the old case from 15 years ago. Say new evidence has emerged that suggests the original ruling was obtained fraudulently. Don't mention Paige being alive, not yet. Just that I've discovered irregularities in the medical records and want a review. That'll tip them off that you're investigating. Good. I want them nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. Rosie studied him. Blake, what are you planning? I'm planning to give them exactly what they tried to avoid 15 years ago. Public exposure, family shame, the destruction of everything they value. And I'm going to make sure they can't run from it. That sounds like revenge, not justice. Maybe, Blake said. But right now, I don't much care about the difference. Blake's second call was to his mechanic and only real friend, Wade Ruiz. They met at the shop that night, and Blake laid out everything that had happened. Wade listened in silence, his weathered face expressionless. He was 52, a former Marine who'd done 2 tours in Iraq before civilian life had broken him down in ways combat never had. He'd been working at Blake's shop for 3 years, and in that time, they developed the kind of friendship that didn't require many words. So you're going to war, Wade said finally. Yes. Against people with money and power. Yes. Wade nodded. What do you need? Over the next week, Blake began assembling his plan. It required patience, research, and the kind of cold calculation he'd never thought himself capable of. But every time he felt his resolve wavering, he thought of Paige in that room, 18 years old and unable to walk or speak, 15 years of her life stolen. He started by hiring a private investigator, a woman named Celeste Gilmore, who specialized in corporate intelligence. She was expensive, but Blake had been living simply for 15 years, and the sale of his engineering firm after the divorce had left him with more money than he'd admitted to anyone. I need everything on the Calhoun family, Blake told her. Every business deal, every investment, every secret they've buried. I need to know where they're vulnerable. Celeste delivered 2 weeks later with a file 6 inches thick. The Calhoun pharmaceutical fortune was built on patents for 3 major drugs, but the company had been struggling for years. Generic competition had eroded profits, and a series of bad investments had left them over-leveraged. Martin was covering the losses by slowly liquidating family assets, but he was running out of things to sell. Barbara's position on the State Medical Ethics Commission was under scrutiny following allegations that she'd accepted gifts from pharmaceutical companies in exchange for favorable rulings. Nothing had been proven, but the investigation was ongoing. Christopher, the son, had his own problems. He'd been accused of sexual harassment by 3 different women at his law firm, settlements paid quietly to avoid publicity. His marriage to the Attorney General's niece was rumored to be failing. And Melinda, Blake's ex-wife, had remarried, a venture capitalist named Jeremy Mackey. But the marriage was troubled. Melinda had been treated twice for addiction to prescription painkillers, checking into rehab facilities under assumed names. They're barely holding it together, Celeste said. The image of perfection is a facade. One good push, and the whole structure collapses. Blake studied the files. I need you to find out everything about Meadowbrook Care Center. Who owns it? Who runs it? Where the money comes from. And I need to know if there are other patients like Paige, people who've been disappeared. You think this is systematic? I think the Cowhounds found a facility that was willing to hide inconvenient problems for the right price. And I think if we dig deep enough, we'll find they weren't the only family using that service. 3 weeks later, Celeste returned with information that made Blake's blood run cold. Meadowbrook had 17 patients in the long-term isolation ward. 15 of them had death certificates on file with the state. All 15 had been declared dead within months of admission. All had closed casket funerals, and all were still alive, maintained in minimal care on the facility's hidden books. The facility was owned by a shell corporation traced back to a consortium of wealthy families, including the Cowhounds. It was a warehouse for embarrassments, disabled children, inconvenient relatives, anyone who threatened the perfect image these families cultivated. This isn't just about Paige, Blake said quietly. This is about 17 people who've been erased. You take this to the FBI, they'll handle it, Celeste said. And the Cowhounds will hire the best lawyers in the country, drag it out for years, probably get minimal sentences if they're convicted at all. No, I want them destroyed. Completely. Blake spent the next month preparing. He worked with Rosie to file the custody petition, careful not to reveal that Paige was alive. The petition simply stated that Blake had obtained evidence suggesting the original custody ruling had been influenced by fraudulent medical testimony and conflicts of interest. The Cowhounds responded exactly as expected. Their lawyers filed motions to dismiss, arguing the case was long settled and Blake was harassing the family. Barbara personally called Blake, her voice cold. Whatever game you're playing, Blake, it ends now. That custody battle was decided 15 years ago. Paige is gone. Let her rest in peace. Interesting choice of words, Blake said. Rest in peace. That implies she's dead, Barbara. A pause on the line. She is dead. You buried her. I buried an empty coffin. Want to explain that? Another pause, longer. Then Barbara's voice, harder. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but you're pursuing a fantasy. There's nothing to find. And if you continue this harassment, we'll file for a restraining order and sue you for emotional distress. Do what you need to do. I'll see you in court. He hung up and smiled. They were rattled. Good. The break Blake had been waiting for came from an unexpected source. Diana Joyce called him late one night, her voice shaking. Mr. McDermott, they know. The facility administrator came to me today, asking about room 47. Someone told them I'd been accessing old records. Did they confront you about calling me? No, but they're watching me now. And they're talking about moving Paige. Can you stall them? Maybe a few days. But Blake, there's something else. Another nurse, Allison Daly. She's worked here for 20 years. She came to me after the administrator left. She said if I was looking into the long-term patients, I should talk to her. She knows things. Can I meet with her? She's scared. These people, the families involved, they're powerful. But she said if you want to make this right, she'll help. She's been carrying guilt for 20 years. Blake met Allison Daly at a rest stop halfway between Meadowbrook and Philadelphia. She was in her mid-50s, with the worn look of someone who'd seen too much and stayed silent too long. I started working at Meadowbrook right out of nursing school, Allison said, clutching a coffee cup. Back then, it was a legitimate facility. Good care, dedicated staff. Then about 18 years ago, new management took over. They created the long-term isolation ward, told us it was for patients who needed absolute quiet for recovery. But that wasn't what it was. She pulled out a notebook, pages filled with handwritten names and dates. I kept records. Every patient they disappeared, every family that paid to have someone erased. The Cowhounds weren't the first, and they weren't the worst. There's a girl in room 52, Olivia Darling. She was 16 when her family committed her for hysteria, which really meant she'd gotten pregnant by the wrong boy. They told everyone she'd died in a psychiatric facility. She's 34 now, and she's perfectly sane. She's just been locked up for 18 years because her family was embarrassed. Blake felt sick. How many? 17 currently. Over the years? Maybe 30. Some actually did die eventually. But most are still there, warehoused, forgotten. Why didn't you go to the authorities? Allison's eyes filled with tears. I tried once, 8 years ago. called the state health department, filed an anonymous complaint. A week later, inspectors came. But they only saw what the facility wanted them to see: the main wards, the proper patients. The long-term isolation wing wasn't on any official floor plans. And 2 weeks after that, I had a visit from a lawyer representing the facility. He knew it was me who'd called. He said if I ever made another complaint, I'd lose my nursing license and face criminal charges for violating patient confidentiality. My daughter was in college. I couldn't risk it. She pushed the notebook across the table. But I kept records anyway, just in case someone who couldn't be intimidated ever came asking. I think you're that person, Mr. McDermott. Blake took the notebook. Inside were names, dates, family connections, payment records that Allison had pieced together over years of quiet observation. It was devastating evidence, if they could authenticate it. What do you need from me? Blake asked. Save them, Allison said simply. All of them, not just your daughter. Make this public in a way they can't bury. And make sure the families who did this pay for it. That's the plan. But I need you to do something. Can you gather the other nurses who know about this? The ones who've been carrying guilt like you? I need them ready to testify when the time comes. There are 5 of us who've been there long enough to know. I'll talk to them. And I need you to keep Paige safe. If they try to move her, call me immediately. Allison nodded. I owe these patients that much. I owe your daughter that much. Blake's plan crystallized over the next 2 weeks. Going to the authorities would result in a long investigation, probable cover-ups, and minimal punishment for the families involved. The legal system was designed to protect people with money and power, so Blake would use a different system, public opinion. But he needed the exposure to be overwhelming, undeniable, and perfectly timed. He needed the Calhouns and the other families to have no time to spin the story, no opportunity to make it disappear. He started by reaching out to an investigative journalist named Gary Kaplan, who'd built a reputation for exposing institutional corruption. Blake laid out the entire story: Paige, the fake death, the other patients, the families involved. Gary listened with growing intensity, occasionally stopping Blake to verify details. This is massive, he said finally. This could bring down some of the most powerful families in 3 states. But I need absolute proof. I need access to the facility, to the patients, to the records. Can you get me that? I'm working on it. And I need to interview Paige. If this girl has been locked up for 15 years, and she's responsive, she's the story. She's what makes this real for people. Blake hesitated. The thought of exposing Paige to cameras, to public scrutiny, went against every protective instinct he had. But he also knew Gary was right. Without Paige's face, her story, this remained abstract. Just numbers and names. I'll talk to her, Blake said. But we do this on my terms. She's not a prop for your story. She's a person who's been through hell, and whatever we do has to be about helping her, not exploiting her. Agreed, Gary said. But Blake, you need to understand. Once this story breaks, your life changes. The Calhouns will come after you with everything they have. You'll be in court for years. You'll face accusations, investigations, character assassinations. Are you ready for that? Blake thought of Paige in that wheelchair, 15 years stolen from her. Yes. The next piece fell into place when Celeste discovered that Martin Calhoun was scheduled to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award from the State Medical Association in 6 weeks. It would be a gala event attended by politicians, medical professionals, and media. The Calhouns would be there in force, celebrating their family legacy. That's when we do it, Blake told his assembled team. Rosie, Wade, Celeste, Gary, Diana, and Allison. They met in the back room of Blake's auto shop, the air thick with tension and purpose. The night of the gala, Blake continued, Gary's story breaks. Every major news outlet, every social media platform, every channel we can access. Photos of the patients, the records, the financial documents. The families' names, their connections, everything. We bury them in truth before they can spin a single lie. They'll claim the records are falsified, Rosie warned. Which is why we need more than records, Blake said. We need the patients themselves. Gary, can your network get cameras into Meadowbrook? If Diana and Allison can get me access, yes. But Blake, getting cameras in is one thing. Getting those patients out is another. Some of them haven't been outside in decades. Some are medically fragile. This isn't just about exposure, it's about rescue. I know, Blake said. Which is why we need law enforcement ready to act the moment the story breaks. Not local police, They might be compromised. We go to the FBI, the State Attorney General, the U.S. Attorney's Office. We give them everything simultaneously, packaged so perfectly they have no choice but to act. Wade spoke up. And what about Paige? She going to be in the middle of this media storm? Blake had thought about this constantly. Paige gets moved to County General the night before the story breaks. Diana arranges the transfer, citing a medical emergency. By the time the Calhouns realize what's happening, she'll be in a facility they don't control, with doctors who can testify to her actual condition. And I'll be there with her. They'll file for an emergency injunction, Rosie said. Let them. By the time any judge hears it, the story will be public. They'll be defending themselves against fraud and false imprisonment charges. A custody dispute will be the least of their problems. Over the next month, the pieces moved into place with careful precision. Gary's team documented everything, interviewing Allison and 2 other nurses who'd agreed to go on record, obtaining copies of the financial records, photographing the long-term isolation ward during a carefully coordinated visit. Gary personally interviewed Paige, his questions gentle, giving her time to respond with the limited gestures and sounds she could manage. The interview footage was devastating. Paige's eyes, alive with intelligence, trapped in a body that years of neglect had wasted. Her hand gripping Blake's, the only communication she could manage. Gary's voiceover explaining that this young woman had been declared dead at 3 years old, buried in absentia, while she spent 15 years in a room no one was meant to find. Blake watched the rough cut and wept. It was perfect, heartbreaking and infuriating in equal measure. No one who saw this could dismiss it. No one could claim Paige wasn't a real person who'd been horrifically wronged. 3 days before the gala, Blake made his final preparations. He'd arranged for Paige's transfer to County General, with Diana and 2 trusted paramedics handling transport. He'd coordinated with Gary's team to ensure the story would break across 15 different outlets simultaneously. And he'd made sure Rosie had filed emergency custody petitions in 3 different jurisdictions, making it nearly impossible for the Calhouns to forum shop for a friendly judge. But there was one more thing Blake needed to do, something that had been burning in him since the day he'd found Paige. He drove to the Calhoun estate, a sprawling property in the Philadelphia suburbs. Martin and Barbara still lived in the main house, a colonial mansion that had been in the family for 4 generations. Blake parked on the street and walked up the circular drive. Barbara answered the door herself, her face registering shock and then fury when she saw him. "You're not welcome here," she said coldly. "Leave, or I'll call the police." "I wanted to give you a chance," Blake said. "One chance to do the right thing before this all comes down on you." "I don't know what you're talking about. Paige is alive. I found her. And in 3 days, the whole world is going to know what you did to her. What you did to 17 other people. It's over, Barbara. You can't make this disappear." Barbara's composure cracked slightly. "You have no proof of anything. Whatever you think you've discovered. I have medical records showing Paige's condition is far better than you claimed. I have financial documents showing you've been paying Meadowbrook to keep her hidden. I have nurses who are willing to testify about what really happens in that facility. I have a death certificate for a child who's alive. And I have Paige herself, ready to tell her story." Barbara's hand gripped the door frame. "She can't speak. She's brain damaged. She's impaired because you left her to rot for 15 years. But she can communicate, and she understands everything. And she remembers you, Barbara. She remembers the grandmother who decided she wasn't worth saving." For a moment, something that might have been shame flickered across Barbara's face. Then it hardened into cold resolve. "If you pursue this, we'll destroy you," she said. "We have resources you can't imagine. We'll tie you up in court for decades. We'll make sure you never have a moment's peace. That girl will be an adult before you ever get custody, if you survive the legal battle at all." "I'm not here to negotiate," Blake said. "I'm here to tell you that I'm coming for you. For all of you. And when I'm done, the Calhoun name will be synonymous with everything you've spent your lives pretending you're not. Cruel, heartless people who threw away a child because she was inconvenient." He turned to leave, then looked back. "You could have just loved her, Barbara. That's all she needed. But you chose this instead. Remember that when everything falls apart." The night before the gala, Diana coordinated Paige's transfer. Blake rode in the ambulance, holding his daughter's hand as they transported her to County General. The medical team there performed a comprehensive evaluation, and their findings were exactly what Blake needed. Evidence of long-term neglect, but also evidence that with proper care and therapy, Paige could regain significant function. She's been kept in a state of minimal responsiveness, the neurologist explained. But there's no evidence of severe brain damage. With physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, she could potentially walk, communicate, live a much fuller life than her current state suggests. So everything they told me 15 years ago was a lie. Based on these scans, either they were working with falsified data, or they never intended to give her a chance to recover. Blake had his final piece of evidence. The gala was held at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, a glittering affair with Philadelphia's elite in attendance. Martin Calhoun stood at the podium, accepting his Lifetime Achievement Award, speaking about dedication to medical ethics and family values. At exactly 8:47 p.m., Gary Kaplan's story went live. Within minutes, the gala attendees' phones began buzzing. The story was everywhere: The Washington Post, The New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, every major outlet, and dozens of smaller ones. Video of Paige, her eyes tracking the camera, her hands squeezing Blake's. Interviews with nurses describing the long-term isolation ward. Financial documents showing the payments. Death certificates for people who were provably alive. And photos, 17 photos of patients in various states of neglect, each with a name, a family, and a story of how they'd been disappeared. The Calhoun's names were prominent throughout, along with 8 other families. The article detailed how they'd used Meadowbrook as a dumping ground for inconvenient relatives, paying to have them declared dead and forgotten. The gala erupted into chaos. Martin stood frozen at the podium as museum security tried to contain the growing crowd of reporters who descended on the event. Barbara's face appeared briefly on camera before she fled toward the exit. Christopher Calhoun was surrounded by journalists, his face red with fury, shouting, "No comment," repeatedly. By midnight, FBI agents were executing search warrants at Meadowbrook Care Center. State police were posted at each family's residence. The U.S. attorney had announced a criminal investigation into fraud, false imprisonment, and conspiracy. And Blake sat beside Paige's hospital bed, watching the news coverage, feeling something like peace for the first time in 15 years. The fallout was swift and devastating. Martin Calhoun's award was rescinded within hours. Barbara was suspended from the State Medical Ethics Commission and resigned before she could be officially removed. Christopher's law firm placed him on indefinite administrative leave, and his wife filed for divorce. Melinda, Blake's ex-wife, appeared on the news 3 days after the story broke, tearfully claiming she'd been manipulated by her family, that she believed Paige was truly dead. But Celeste had already provided journalists with records showing Melinda had signed off on quarterly review documents for years, documents that couldn't exist if Paige had been dead. The public didn't forgive her. Criminal charges came within 2 weeks. Martin and Barbara were charged with fraud, conspiracy, and false imprisonment. The facility's director faced multiple counts of fraud and elder abuse. 6 other families faced similar charges for their roles in the scheme. But Blake wasn't satisfied with criminal charges. He wanted more. Working with Rosie and a coalition of attorneys representing the other victims' families, Blake filed a massive civil lawsuit. Not just against the Calhouns and Meadowbrook, but against every institution that had enabled this: the county that had issued false death certificates, the funeral homes that had conducted fake services, the doctors who'd provided fraudulent medical testimony. The lawsuit sought damages in the hundreds of millions, but more importantly, it kept the story alive. Every court filing, every deposition, every revelation kept the public's attention focused on what had been done to these 17 people. The Calhouns hired the best legal team money could buy, but they were fighting a losing battle. The evidence was overwhelming, the public sentiment was against them, and every day brought new revelations about other aspects of their corruption. 6 months after the story broke, Martin Calhoun was found in his study, dead from an apparent suicide. His note was brief: "I could not live with the shame." Barbara faced trial alone. The prosecution presented a devastating case: Paige's medical records, testimony from nurses, financial documents showing 15 years of payments to keep a child imprisoned. Gary's interview footage of Paige was shown in court, and several jurors were seen wiping their eyes. Barbara's defense argued that she believed she was acting in Paige's best interest, that the medical professionals had advised this course of action. But when Rosie cross-examined her, the facade crumbled. Mrs. Calhoun, you signed quarterly review documents for 15 years. Each document confirmed that Paige was alive and receiving care. Yet you told Mr. McDermott she was dead. Can you explain that discrepancy? The documents were just formalities. I didn't read them carefully. You didn't read documents about your granddaughter's care for 15 years? I trusted the facility. Did you also trust them when they provided you with a fake death certificate? When they helped you arrange a funeral for a living child? Barbara had no answer. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Christopher Calhoun took a plea deal, testifying against his mother and the facility's administrators in exchange for a reduced sentence. He served 3 years in federal prison and was disbarred. Melinda disappeared from public life entirely, her second marriage ending in divorce, her addiction struggles becoming tabloid fodder. But the most satisfying moment for Blake came 10 months after the story broke, when he walked into family court with full medical evaluations of Paige, testimony from her doctors about her progress, and a simple request: full custody, no restrictions. The judge, a stern woman named Della Larson, reviewed the evidence carefully. Then she looked at Blake. Mr. McDermott, I've read about what you've accomplished in the past year. Not just exposing this facility, but the work you've done with your daughter. Her therapists say she's making remarkable progress. She's a fighter, Blake said. She always has been. She just needed someone to give her a chance. Judge Larson nodded. Custody is granted. Full parental rights restored. And Mr. McDermott? I'm sorry for what you and your daughter endured. I hope the rest of her life makes up for the years she lost. 2 years after the story broke, Blake stood in the living room of his new house, a small ranch he'd bought in a quiet neighborhood with the settlement money from the lawsuits. Paige sat on the couch, her posture still a bit stiff, but she was sitting on her own, no wheelchair needed. She still couldn't speak clearly. The years of neglect had left lasting damage. But she could make sounds, could communicate yes and no, could write slowly with her right hand. And she was learning more every day. Wade was teaching her to paint, setting up an easel by the window where the afternoon light was best. Diana visited every week, having left Meadowbrook after testifying in the trials. She and Paige had formed a bond, the nurse who'd saved her and the girl who'd survived. The other 16 patients from Meadowbrook had all been freed, reunited with relatives who hadn't known they were alive, or placed in proper care facilities. 3 of them, including Olivia Darling, had joined Blake's lawsuit. Olivia had testified at Barbara's trial, describing 18 years in a room, and her quiet, devastating testimony had sealed the conviction. The Calhoun Pharmaceutical Company had collapsed, sold off in pieces to pay legal judgments. The family mansion had been seized and auctioned. The name that had once represented prestige in Philadelphia was now a cautionary tale about the corruption of wealth and privilege. Blake's phone rang. It was Gary Kaplan. Blake, wanted to give you a heads up. My follow-up story is running tomorrow. It's about the other facilities we've found. Turns out Meadowbrook wasn't unique. We've identified 6 other places operating similar schemes. How many people? 43 so far. And we're still investigating. Blake felt the old anger stir, but also something else, determination. What do you need from me? Your story gave people courage to come forward. I was hoping you'd be willing to be interviewed again, talk about Paige's recovery, show people that these victims can rebuild their lives. Blake looked at Paige, focused intently on her painting. A landscape, the colors bold and bright, nothing like the gray room she'd spent 15 years in. Let me talk to Paige, he said. If she's okay with it, we'll do it. He ended the call and sat beside his daughter. She looked at him, a question in her eyes. Someone wants to interview us again, Blake said. About how you're doing, about the progress you've made. It would help other people who've been through what you have, but only if you're comfortable with it. Paige was quiet for a moment. Then her hand moved to the notepad she kept nearby. Slowly, carefully, she wrote 2 words. Help them. Blake smiled, his eyes stinging. That's my girl. That evening, after Wade had left and Paige had gone to bed, Blake sat on the back porch with a beer, looking at the stars. He thought about the past 2 years, the trials, the media attention, the slow process of helping Paige rebuild a life that had been stolen from her. He thought about Barbara Calhoun, serving a 20-year sentence in federal prison. About Christopher, disgraced and divorced. About Melinda, who'd sent Blake a letter 6 months ago, an apology he'd never answered. He thought about the empty coffin in the cemetery, a monument to a lie. He'd never had it dug up, never replaced it. It stood as a reminder of what the Calhouns had been willing to do, the depth of their cruelty. But mostly, he thought about Paige. About her smile when she'd managed to walk across the living room on her own for the first time. About the way she'd squeezed his hand when the jury had read the verdict against Barbara. About the painting she was working on, her way of expressing everything she couldn't yet say. The Calhouns had tried to erase her, had succeeded for 15 years. But Paige had survived. And in the end, her existence, her persistence, her refusal to simply disappear, had destroyed them more completely than any revenge Blake could have planned. Justice had been served, in the courts and in the court of public opinion. The guilty had been punished, the victims freed. Blake's daughter had her life back, and a future full of possibility. It was enough. Blake finished his beer and went inside, checking on Paige one last time before bed. She was asleep, her breathing steady, peaceful. He kissed her forehead gently. "Sweet dreams, baby girl," he whispered. "You're safe now. You're home." And for the first time in 17 years, that was completely, undeniably true. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.